This revision video is on John Clare's poem about after reading in a letter proposals for building a cottage. So a small amount of background then. Richard Mabey describes Clare as the ecological minstrel, singing the songs of the silent majority, nature, for them. In addition, Clare's biographer, Jonathan Bate, describes him as the greatest labouring class poet that England has ever produced. No one has ever written more powerfully of nature, of a rural childhood, and of the alienated and unstable self. So high praise indeed, particularly more recently, not so much recognised at the time in the same way that other Romantic poets were. He was known in his lifetime as the Northamptonshire peasant poet, and he was very much from a working class background and was working in the fields when he was 7. While he was working as a potboy at a local pub, he fell in love with Mary Joyce, and many of his poems, there is a very strong sense of loss, as the relationship didn't work out. She was from a higher class family, and her father forbade her to see him. Clare's first publication, which is poems descriptive of rural life and scenery, is a nostalgic lament for the open fields and common meadowlands of his boyhood. In 1809, a Parliamentary Act introduced enclosure, which meant that the countryside was being split up and possessed in a way that it wasn't before. In 1837, and this is after kind of increasing mental pressure for a variety of reasons, dwindling popularity for rustic poetry, and pressure from his publishers to conform to a certain poetic style and not to write in his dialect and to write more formally in a way that he didn't feel comfortable with. He was admitted to a mental asylum in Highbeach in Epping. A few years later, in 1841, he escaped from that asylum and walked home to Northamptonshire, and he was under the delusion that he would be reunited with Mary Joyce there. A few months later, he entered an asylum in Northamptonshire, and he lived there for the rest of his life. He was still writing poems when his mental health permitted, and some of those later poems are very haunting. So a reading of the poem, then followed by a few annotations to complement the ones that you've done in class. After reading in a letter proposals for building a cottage. Beside a runnel build my shed, with stubbles covered o'er. Let broad oaks o'er its chimney spread, and grass plats grace the door. The door may open with a string, so that it closes tight, and locks would be a wanted thing to keep out thieves at night. A little garden, not too fine, enclosed with painted pales, and woodbines round the cot to twine, pinned to the wall with nails. Let hazels grow and spindling sedge bent bowering overhead, dig old man's beard from woodland hedge to twine a summer shade. Beside the threshold sods provide, and build a summer seat. Plant sweetbriar bushes by its side, and flowers that blossom sweet. I love the sparrows' ways to watch upon the cotters' sheds, so here and there pull out the thatch that they may hide their heads. And as the sweeping swallows stop their flights along the green, leave holes within the chimney top to paste their nest between. Stick shelves and cupboards round the hut in all the holes and nooks, nor in the corner fail to put a cupboard for the books. Along the floor some sand I'll sift to make it fit to live in, and then I'll thank you for the gift as something worth the giving. So a few annotations then. Around the poem in red are some of the more archaic language that you may find difficult if you're not familiar with it. Thinking about the title, a proposal often means a business proposal, something written in a newspaper about planning permission, things like that, when you're talking about housing. But it's also interesting to think about the idea of a love proposal and the idea that this could be a love poem to nature. Clare talks about a shed, first of all, rather than introducing it as a cottage, and it's a very modest aspiration. It's quite natural sounding, and it links with animals. You more commonly associate a shed with a cattle shed or something you find in the garden rather than a home. Clare desires nature's presence in his home. Grace the door suggests pleasure and that nature is welcome, and it's not trying to shut out, you're not trying to weed the garden, that you're kind of embracing being surrounded by natural things. The idea about locks being a wanted thing in the third line of the second stanza suggests that the cottage is precious, it needs protection, and therefore it's something really valuable to Clare. Again, the suggestion of a little garden not too fine is similarly modest. He's not looking for anything grand, he's looking for something that has more value than just monetary value. The use of imperatives is interesting. I'd like you to think more about this and kind of develop your own idea. But could it be that it's quite reflective? Could it be that it's purposeful, that he knows exactly what he wants from this cottage? Or could it be that it's prayer-like, that it's a kind of plea, that this is how the cottage should be? I found the alliteration of spindling sedge and bent bough quite calming. It's kind of increases the pace, but it makes it seem quite gentle, and it's quite a calming tone through the alliteration. You also have images and vocabulary suggest togetherness. So you've got twine, which is repeated twice in the third and fourth stanza. You've got tight, you've got covered, you've got string, you've got beside. It's the idea that maybe nature and humans can live next to each other, together, communally, and that's maybe really important to Clare. Beside the threshold, sods provide and build a summer seat. Plant sweetbriar bushes by its side and flowers that blossom sweet. It's a really lovely summer image. You get a very sensual there with the flowers and the smell and the images and the idea of being sat outside in summer. It's a lovely image. This cottage will also provide a home for nature. It will provide a home for the sparrows, and then the rooftops, the chimney top, will provide a home for the swallows as well. So it links humans with the animals again. It suggests that they can live together and they can live harmoniously. You get the beautiful sense of movement and the abrupt stop of the swallows that kind of mimics their pattern and their movement across the sky. The kind of stop being at the end of the line is quite significant because you have that slight pause before you begin the next line, and it means that you really mimic the action of the birds. Again, the idea of modesty is continued. He describes the cottage as a hut, so more like somewhere a shepherd might live or a rural worker rather than a modern and expensive cottage that you would find these days. The idea of togetherness is continued. You've got the notion of stick and pace, so the idea of things being bound together, humans and nature. Interesting allusion to books, perhaps the connection between poetry and nature and how it's really important and nurturing. And then the idea of the gift in the final stanza is very interesting. Something that I'd like you to draw your own conclusions from. Is the cottage a gift from God? Is nature a gift from God? Is it the idea of pantheism coming through, that God is all around us? Is it a gift from human to human, or is it his gift to someone else? And that's something that I'd like you to kind of draw your own conclusions from. However, Clare, I think, believes that material goods are worthless without nature's presence, and that there's a sense that it would be somehow incomplete. So in the poem in general then, there's few human images. The cottage is a vehicle for life, a vehicle for nature, and that's what makes it worthwhile in Clare's eyes. You've got the twinning and the combining and the binding of humans and nature living peacefully, and you get the sense that it's an ageless rural beauty. The form of the poem is very simple, very rhythmic, and very nursery rhyme-like. And again, that could be to reflect how simple nature can be, how rhythmic and how you can't stop nature, it just keeps going. Or it could be to kind of generate a very peaceful but rhythmic form. Okay, and that's something else that you will need to draw your own conclusions from.